Good morning. This foggy weather that we're having here in Columbus is really affecting the quality of the image on the screen, but that's okay. It might be better that it's fuzzy this morning. The allergies and the big black circles, anybody out there relate to this? Okay. Anyway, just hoping you're having a restful weekend, or that you at least got caught up over the weekend with schoolwork and such. I know a lot of you really use those weekends to get things done. While I'm thinking about it, I ought to mention I'm kind of a Monday through Friday kind of gal. I try to get things done in those days because that works better with my family life. If you are ever in a situation where you need to contact me on a Saturday and I'm not answering your discussion board posts or your emails, feel free to use my Northwest State direct email, or even give me a call. I believe you have that number. It's 419-446-2484. And that way you can reach me right away on a Saturday, and hopefully I'll be in a place where I can actually talk or hear you, because oftentimes we're out and about at various sports activities and things. So, okay, looking at this week, we have a paper coming up. All right, much fear and trembling? I hope not. I hope we can feel comfortable with this. Do keep in mind that your papers are a total of 300 points for this course, but they are 100 points apiece, this size of paper. There is a rubric that I'll be using to evaluate the paper. It's page 3 of your syllabus, and it's also printed as a feedback form. And I would like you, when you turn your paper in, I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's a feedback form that we're going to talk about in a moment. So do look over the requirements for this paper as far as the general rubric about focus and quality, organization, support and reasoning, and appropriate academic style. Those are the categories. Let's go ahead then and look where we're at, September 12th. And we are in week 4 in the syllabus, and it's unit 2 still. We're doing our summary response. At this point you have read about 5 or 6 different authors, maybe more, and you have commented on them to your peers in the discussion board. You've had some conversation over that, and excuse me, judging by the conversations you had on the classroom articles previously, I'm really hopeful that this has been helpful to you in your writing process, because I saw some really rich conversation there. Okay, for this paper, you're going to be choosing from Bryson, Lurie, Coffer, Grandin, Huxley, and Reichel, and those are going to be your resources. Please do not use other resources for this paper. And the first thing you're going to do this week is draft something to be edited. Now, for the peer edit, there's one of 2 approaches you can take. You can give people a really rough sketch of what you're doing, like it can be a really rough copy, or it can be a more polished copy. It can be a portion of what you're doing, or it can be a complete picture of what you're doing. When you post to peer edit, ask for something specific. In other words, if you know it's a rough copy and you just want them to see if your thinking is on track, clarify that. If it's a polished copy and you struggle with punctuation perhaps, ask someone specifically to check out your punctuation. Make sure you don't have any run-ons, fragments, make sure your commas are in the right place, whatever it is that's your special nemesis. And then finally, if it's just maybe your introduction that you want them to look at, your thesis statement, that's often a popular one to have students peer edit. I would put it out there. It also helps from an editing standpoint for you to cast a vision. So if you only put your intro out there, if you let them know where you want to go with your paper, not only will that help you, but it might help the student who's editing your work, because they will get to see what your overall vision is and see if your thesis matches that vision, and they can give you more appropriate feedback. Do consider using the thesis worksheet activity for this paper so that you have a starting point and you kind of understand the expectation of making that argument very central to your writing. Okay, this is just looking at the syllabus view. I'm going to go into my content for this unit, for this week. And like I said, we're working on, this is assignment, I keep forgetting the numbers that I've given them. This would be assignment 2-4 that's originally due, this rough draft. And if you look for assignment 2-4 in your course content, you'll see that I walk you through the writing steps. Pre-writing was organizing your information, right? You might look at there's a template PDF that I'm giving out there as an idea that might give you an idea of how to organize this paper. Then there's a review of, and by the way, by doing all of your discussion ahead of time, you might have done quite a bit of pre-writing, just naturally doing some brainstorming on the different topics at hand. Then if we want to review the sample of the prompt, it says what themes or ideas jumped out at you that you could relate to. I'm sorry, this is still on pre-writing, organizing your information. What themes jumped out at you? What areas of expertise or knowledge do you already have so that you could easily relate to this? Probably getting it organized is the most difficult part of the paper, that getting started part. We often have trouble getting started, and then once we get rolling, we often hit another wall. We call it writer's block, and it's really important to keep writing through that. Or if you're a person who does better at taking a break, that might be something to consider too when you hit that wall. Often when you come back from that block, your best ideas come forth, so be encouraged by that. Okay, then step 3, we have to plan the thesis. Let's go back real quickly to last week's course content where I gave you the prompt for this paper, because that's going to be very significant, obviously. And the prompt for this paper is just very general. Some students that frustrates, some of them love it. And the prompt is that just says, citing one of the essays from this unit, construct a 3 to 4 page essay with a single thesis. In other words, you're going to have one central argument, one source. You're going to summarize and respond to the author with your own thoughts. You may agree, disagree, or respond with a yes but, like somewhere in between. Your summary may be in one chunk. In other words, you might summarize and then go into your argument, or you might make it more interactive. You might go from a chunk of summary and then a response to that portion of the summary, another chunk, and a response. The big thing here is going to be that you do choose a central argument, so that your argument is going to hinge on one big idea and then have subparts that you break it down into. So when you think of your summary, think of what argument is central to the author, so you can summarize his or her argument, and within your thesis you'll have a summary of the author's argument along with your response to their argument. Also, for this assignment, you need to include at least one direct quote in your response. One clarification here, I know we've already reviewed MLA, but one direct quote means that you're obviously going to have one internal citation, but you're not limited to one internal citation. Here's what I mean by that. You should absolutely have more than one internal citation. The internal citations or parenthetical citations, some of you might, or in text, these are names for these, with the parentheses and the author's last name and the page number. You don't need, since you're only using one source, you don't need the author's last name because it's obvious which author you're using. But anytime you reference something from that author, you're going to want to cite them. So as you're summarizing, you're going to want to cite as you go along. And then obviously anytime you quote that author, you're going to cite them. Okay, so that's our prompt. Then we're organizing it, we're planning our support this week, and you want to really focus on that thesis. A lot of emphasis on the thesis. The second thing I'm going to emphasize this week in terms of organization is building topic sentences from your thesis. There's a whole section on that in your course content. I'm not going to reread it for you, but do take some time to look through that and look at some of the samples I give. And make sure that as you're writing, I would suggest even as you write every paragraph, at the beginning of each paragraph and at the end, that you read your thesis to make sure every paragraph has a very clear tie-in to your thesis statement. So read your thesis statement, write your paragraph, read your thesis statement again, and make sure you stay on track. That way you don't have as much of a tendency to wander. Then finally, we have drafting. I talk about writing intros and conclusions and what those would look like when they're done most effectively. Again, please do read this in your course content. And then we have editing. There's some suggestions for editing peer papers. Obviously, if you want the most valuable feedback, you're going to want to turn this in early enough that students can actually get a handle on it. Okay? I don't purposely put an earlier deadline than Sunday when your papers actually due, But my strong suggestion is that you get this turned in by Friday at least, so somebody can have a chance to edit. And if your classmates are like me, they may not be working on the weekends on their schoolwork. So you might want to give them a little bit of a jump on that by having it in on Thursday. Then, of course, we have our final assignment this week, the actual paper. By the time you've gone through all the steps to draft your paper, chances are the final part is going to be just the icing on the cake. It might not take you nearly as long as the original part. You're going to revise and edit, thinking about, is this argument clear? Do I have run-ons? What's going on with this? That in your own head, you're kind of self-editing, even though you've already gotten feedback. One thought on feedback: sometimes you might get something from a peer that you don't agree with, like they suggest something that you're like, I don't think so. Especially if you've only gotten one student's feedback, you might see this. You're the final say in what goes into your paper. So don't feel like you have to accept every constructive criticism. The reverse is that you may get all fluff criticism. In other words, someone says, oh, that's great. Try to avoid that as an editor. Definitely give encouragement where encouragement has been earned, but keep in mind that this person really wants you to help them because they want their paper grade to be strong. Okay, so once you've done your rough draft for assignment 2-3 and you've edited somebody else's, you're going to put your original draft that you put on, as well as what criticism you gave somebody else. I'm not going to expect you to put in someone's criticism on your paper or their editing on your paper, because if they don't do it, I can't make your grade rely on somebody else's response. But by all means, if you do get some valuable response, include that in the Dropbox portion of this assignment. And then the final assignment is to complete the actual work. And this is where that feedback sheet comes in. So the feedback sheet, if you continue on in assignment 2-4, is the publishing part of your paper. And it is giving you a chance to go through and really analyze your own work and give me some thoughts on how you felt creating this paper. This is also going to help us set up some future goals for your writing so you can really track your progress and feel like you've learned something. And the other thing I like about this tool is that it helps me have a conversation with you about your paper that's based partly on what you've contributed to the conversation and then partly what I'm saying in return. Do include the teacher evaluation portion of this feedback, because what I'll do is I'll highlight off the rubric where I think you fall in this paper, and then at the very bottom there's a few prompts for me to answer in regards to your paper. And if you put that onto the actual end of your paper along with this feedback form, that's very helpful. So just to clarify, do copy and paste both sections, the student section and the teacher section of the evaluation form, just right after your works cited page on your paper, and then when I go through and make my comments, I'll go down to the bottom and you'll see the most valuable feedback right here on this feedback form. All right, that was a lot of information, but I feel like this week especially merits it. It is a more intense week for us, and just keep in mind that there's sort of an ebb and flow. Next week gets lighter after this one's over, okay? So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Have a great week, and if you have any questions, continue to use that discussion board and the email so that I can help you out as you go along. Bye-bye.